The winter of 1944 descended upon the Ardennes forest like a shroud of steel and snow, bitter winds cutting through the trenches, through the thin uniforms of men who knew that each breath could be their last, and each heartbeat was a countdown toward either survival or annihilation. The 101st Airborne Division, freshly arrived but exhausted from weeks of maneuvering through frozen mud, stiff forests, and enemy fire, found themselves surrounded by the German army in what would become the infamous siege of Bastogne. From the moment they dropped into the town, it was clear they were isolated, cut off from reinforcements, and facing an enemy determined to crush them under superior numbers. Armored divisions and relentless artillery. Yet even in those first chilling hours, a sense of stubborn determination spread among the paratroopers like wildfire through dry leaves. It was not just discipline that held them, but a simmering, almost defiant courage, a shared understanding that surrender was not an option. Communication lines were down, supplies scarce, and temperatures often dipping well below freezing. The roads, essential for movement and supply, were clogged with snow, ice, and the detritus of a war that had ravaged everything in its path. Each paratrooper knew that relief might never come. But what they did not know was how soon General Patton's Third Army would arrive, or that they would make the choice to refuse his rescue, trusting in their own grit, firepower, and sheer human will to hold Bastogne against one of the most formidable German offensives of the war. In the first hours of the siege, every corner of the town became a strategic point, a lifeline, a fortress. Soldiers dug foxholes in frozen earth, transformed barns and factories into strongholds, and mounted every available weapon against advancing forces. Mortars, rifles, and machine guns became extensions of the men themselves, each pull of the trigger a declaration of defiance. As German tanks rumbled closer, the paratroopers' ingenuity became evident. With limited anti-tank weaponry, they rigged ambushes, used the terrain to maximum advantage, and improvised traps that could halt mechanized columns in their tracks. Snowy roads became minefields of ingenuity. Each destroyed bridge, each felled tree, each carefully positioned barricade multiplied their defensive potential. The soldiers' morale, though tested to the brink by cold, hunger, and fatigue, was fueled by something deeper than orders: pride, honor, and the belief that they were guardians of not just Bastogne, but the entire Allied line in the Ardennes. As the German artillery began pounding Bastogne, shells exploding in clouds of ice and earth, the 101st Airborne responded with disciplined fury. Every building was fortified, every street surveyed for choke points, and every soldier understood the rhythm of survival. Dig, fire, reload, move, repeat. The harsh winter became both an enemy and an ally. Frozen rivers slowed armor advances, snow-muffled troop movements, and the bitter cold hardened resolve. Every man counted on his neighbor's courage as much as his own. A single lapse could cost dozens of lives. In these moments, personal heroism intertwined with collective endurance. And the stories of extraordinary bravery, one man holding a street corner with a machine gun while another carried ammunition across open snowfields, emerged from the chaos of combat. It was a crucible that would forge legends, as ordinary soldiers performed deeds that would echo far beyond the snow-covered streets of Bastogne. By the second day, the Germans realized that the town would not fall easily. Reports reached their commanders of unbroken lines, relentless counterfire, and the unshakable confidence of the paratroopers. Every attempt to isolate or intimidate them was met with ingenuity. Rations were rationed with strict precision, wounded men improvised stretchers from debris, and communication was maintained through runners and signal flares despite the constant shelling. The 101st did not merely survive, they adapted, turning every challenge into an opportunity to strengthen their position. Their refusal to surrender was not reckless. It was calculated, honed by training, courage, and an unyielding belief in their own capacity to withstand overwhelming force. The Germans, despite numerical superiority, faced the impossible, a force of men who knew the terrain, knew their weapons, and understood that morale could be a weapon as potent as artillery. Word of General Patton's approach eventually reached the paratroopers. The Third Army's reputation for speed and aggressive maneuvers was well known, and soldiers were aware that relief was near. Yet they did not panic, nor did they surrender initiative. Instead, they made the audacious decision to hold their positions and refuse immediate extraction, confident that they could maintain Bastogne until reinforcements arrived. This choice was emblematic of the division's ethos: self-reliance, calculated risk, and trust in comrades over external rescue. Letters written in those hours, preserved in archives, speak to a quiet defiance. "We may be surrounded," one paratrooper wrote, "but we will hold, and we will not bow to fear." Every man internalized that statement, and it became a mantra echoing through the frozen streets. Throughout the siege, cold, hunger, and relentless enemy assaults created conditions that would have broken lesser units. Yet the 101st endured. Soldiers improvised everything from snow shelters to heating systems, jury-rigged weapons from damaged equipment, and scavenged supplies under fire. Their cohesion, training, and indomitable will allow them to operate as a single organism, each individual action reinforcing the collective defense. Meanwhile, German commanders grew frustrated as attacks were repelled again and again, despite superior numbers and devastating firepower. Every day the paratroopers held Bastogne became a symbolic victory, demonstrating that courage, strategy, and discipline could overcome even the most daunting numerical disadvantages. By the final hours before Patton's arrival, the defenders' resilience had transformed Bastogne from a potential defeat into a beacon of defiance. Their decision to refuse immediate rescue forced the Germans to reconsider strategy, bought crucial time for the Allied front, and solidified the 101st's legendary status. As soldiers huddled in freezing foxholes, rifle barrels chilled and fingers raw from the cold, there was a shared recognition that history was being written in real time. And in those moments of extreme peril, every man understood that the siege was more than survival. It was a statement, a refusal to yield, and a declaration that the 101st would shape destiny on their own terms. As the first tanks of Patton's Third Army thundered through the Ardennes, breaking through snow and German lines alike, the 101st watched, prepared to resume their defense if necessary, yet unshaken in their independence. Their refusal to be rescued until absolutely necessary was not arrogance. It was strategy, courage, and the embodiment of a principle that would echo through military history. Sometimes the most heroic act is to stand alone, to endure, and to make the enemy believe in your invincibility before reinforcements even arrive. The snow-swept Ardennes stretched endlessly, a silent, frozen battlefield where every tree, every hill, and every ruined building could be both a shield and a trap. The 101st Airborne Division, battle-weary yet unbowed, moved through this frozen labyrinth with a precision and purpose that defied their exhaustion. Commanders quickly realized that Bastogne was more than a mere town. It was a keystone in the Ardennes offensive, a position that could determine the momentum of the entire battle. Yet, despite being surrounded, the paratroopers refused to surrender or rely solely on external relief. Instead, they transformed each disadvantage into a strategic advantage. Their intimate knowledge of urban terrain, combined with the ingenuity that only men under extreme pressure can develop, allowed them to set traps, ambush points, and defensive positions that confounded German commanders at every turn. From the very first day of the siege, the 101st demonstrated an uncanny ability to anticipate enemy movements. They improvised defensive lines in streets littered with debris, converted barns and warehouses into mini-fortresses, and used the harsh winter conditions to amplify their strengths while diminishing German mobility. Every snowdrift became cover, every frozen creek a natural barrier. Even with limited anti-tank weapons, soldiers coordinated ambushes with mortars, rifle fire, and artillery, creating kill zones that slowed, stalled, and sometimes destroyed superior German armored columns. The paratroopers' ability to integrate terrain, timing, and firepower was not instinct alone. It was an evolving strategy born from relentless training, observation, and a fierce determination to control every square inch of Bastogne. The psychological warfare waged by the 101st was equally masterful. By holding positions with unflinching resolve and refusing immediate rescue, they projected a confidence that belied their isolation. German commanders were repeatedly misled into overestimating the defenders' strength, hesitant to launch full assaults for fear of heavy losses. Every small victory, repelling a tank, holding a street corner, or destroying a supply convoy, was magnified in its psychological effect. The town itself became a fortress, but more importantly, it became a symbol of unyielding resistance. Letters from paratroopers, diaries, and radio messages reveal that morale was carefully cultivated. Each man understood that his actions directly influenced the perception of the entire division, turning every defensive maneuver into both a physical and psychological strike. Supply shortages forced the 101st to innovate under extreme conditions. Food, ammunition, and medical supplies were rationed with ruthless efficiency. Every drop of fuel and every shell was accounted for, and soldiers improvised ways to stretch limited resources. They melted snow for water, used destroyed vehicles for fuel, and repurposed debris to reinforce fortifications. The ingenuity born of scarcity became a force multiplier. While the Germans relied on conventional tactics and supply lines, the paratroopers leveraged creativity and adaptability to offset their numerical inferiority. Each improvisation reinforced the narrative of invincibility. A small, isolated force holding against overwhelming odds was not simply surviving, it was thriving under pressure. Communication with external forces was limited, yet every message and intelligence report was carefully interpreted and acted upon. Scouts and runners navigated treacherous terrain to relay information about enemy movements, while officers coordinated defenses through a mix of pre-planned contingencies and rapid tactical adjustments. The division functioned as a living organism, each squad, platoon, and company reacting in unison, anticipating enemy strategies before they could fully develop. It was an orchestration of human will and battlefield awareness, honed by necessity and tempered by the unforgiving winter. Every soldier, from the newest recruit to the most seasoned officer, played a critical role in maintaining the integrity of the defensive network. As German forces intensified their assaults, the strategic brilliance of the 101st became undeniable. They executed counterattacks with precision, targeted weak points in enemy lines, and disrupted supply chains. Even when artillery shells turned streets into rubble and entire buildings collapsed under bombardment, the division adapted, using the destruction as cover, concealment, and traps for advancing forces. Their refusal to be rescued by Patton until absolutely necessary was a calculated maneuver. It bought time, allowed defensive positions to be reinforced, and forced the Germans to commit resources in futile attacks. It was audacious, brilliant, and emblematic of the division's unique combination of courage and tactical intelligence. By the final hours before Patton's breakthrough, the 101st had not only held Bastogne, but had transformed it into an unassailable fortress. Their actions delayed the German advance, inflicted disproportionate casualties, and became a defining moment in the Battle of the Bulge. The combination of physical endurance, ingenuity, psychological warfare, and unwavering resolve created a scenario where a numerically inferior, surrounded force could dictate the pace and outcome of engagements. Soldiers later described a sense of unity, purpose, and almost prophetic understanding of the battlefield that allowed them to maintain morale and effectiveness under conditions that would have crushed ordinary units, as the rumble of Patton's approaching tanks echoed. Through the snow-covered streets, the paratroopers remained vigilant, ready to continue their defense if needed, yet confident in the knowledge that their strategic mastery had already secured the town. The refusal to be rescued until the last moment was more than a tactical decision. It was a statement of self-reliance, courage, and unbreakable spirit. The siege of Bastogne had become a crucible, forging the 101st into a legend whose actions would be studied, admired, and emulated for generations. In the silence that followed, broken only by the crunch of snow under armored tracks, the division proved that strategic genius, courage, and relentless determination could overcome even the harshest odds, and that true heroes often write history not by surrendering to fate, but by defying it with every ounce of strength. Winter in the Ardennes was a merciless adversary, a frozen specter that seeped into every corner, every foxhole, and every crack in the paratroopers' uniforms. Snow fell relentlessly, blanketing the streets of Bastogne in layers of white that concealed the dangers beneath and amplified the dangers above. Temperatures plunged far below freezing, turning rivers into brittle ice and mud into slick death traps. Frostbite was as constant a threat as enemy fire, and hunger gnawed at the men with a persistence that matched the pounding of artillery shells. Yet despite this frozen hell, the 101st Airborne Division pressed on, their resolve hardened by necessity and sharpened by fear. Each step through the icy streets was a gamble. Every march across the snow-laden fields risked hidden mines, sudden sniper fire, or collapsing roofs under artillery impact. Soldiers learned to move with cautious precision, their senses heightened, every movement deliberate, every breath a battle against both the enemy and nature itself. The cold was not merely an inconvenience. It became a weapon wielded by both sides. German forces, expecting American troops to falter under the brutal conditions, pressed relentlessly, assuming that frostbite and exhaustion would weaken Bastogne's defenses. They were wrong. The 101st adapted, turning snowdrifts into protective walls, frozen streams into barriers against tanks and infantry, and makeshift ice-covered trenches into near impenetrable fortifications. Improvisation became a matter of life and death. Soldiers melted snow for water, scavenged fuel from abandoned vehicles to keep stoves alight, and repurposed debris to reinforce barricades. Every act of ingenuity, however small, multiplied the division's resilience and transformed adversity into tactical advantage. Morale in the frozen town became a critical battlefield in itself. The 101st relied on discipline, camaraderie, and humor to endure conditions that would have shattered ordinary units. Letters home, smuggled photographs, and whispered conversations reveal a complex interplay of fear, defiance, and pride. Men shared stories of narrow escapes, improvised meals, and small victories, creating a sense of unity that bound them together more tightly than any formal command could achieve. The mental toughness cultivated under these conditions was as decisive as any weapon. It allowed soldiers to continue fighting, to anticipate enemy movements, and to maintain cohesion even when surrounded and outgunned. Artillery and small arms fire added a lethal soundtrack to the winter landscape. Snow muffled some sounds but amplified others, creating confusion for both defenders and attackers. The 101st learned to read these auditory cues, discerning the direction, type, and imminence of enemy attacks from subtle variations in sound. Night operations were particularly harrowing. Blizzards reduced visibility to mere feet, forcing soldiers to rely on memory, instinct, and the faint glimmer of flares and fires for navigation. Patrols ventured into the darkness, braving both German patrols and treacherous ice to secure supply routes, gather intelligence, and reinforce weak points. Each mission was a delicate balance of courage and calculation, where one misstep could mean capture or death. Medical conditions worsened under the relentless cold. Frostbite, hypothermia, and injuries from both combat and the environment taxed the division's limited medical resources. Medics, often operating in sub-zero temperatures, improvised treatments using blankets, fires, and sheer determination to save lives. Evacuation was nearly impossible. Roads were clogged with snow, enemy fire, and wrecked vehicles. Yet even under these conditions, the 101st maintained operational effectiveness, rotating squads, rationing rest periods, and maintaining defensive positions without faltering. The sheer tenacity required to operate under such extremes elevated the division's legend, demonstrating that courage and ingenuity could compensate for material limitations. The interplay between cold and combat created unforeseen tactical advantages. Frozen terrain impeded German tanks and infantry, slowing attacks and forcing enemy forces into predictable channels where the 101st could concentrate firepower. Roads became death traps for armored columns, which often became immobilized in snow and ice. Mortar and artillery teams exploited these choke points, delivering devastating barrages that compounded German losses. Even in retreat or regrouping, the frozen landscape favored the defenders, allowing a smaller force to inflict disproportionate damage on a numerically superior foe. Soldiers learned to move silently across snow, to use icy rooftops for observation, and to anticipate enemy movements through patterns in snowdrifts, footprints, and even the way the wind carried sounds. By the final days before Patton's arrival, the paratroopers' endurance had transformed Bastogne from a besieged town into an unyielding fortress. Their mastery of winter warfare, adaptation to extreme cold, and innovative defensive tactics had not only preserved life, but amplified the town's strategic importance. Every shell that struck, every frostbitten finger, every exhausted step reinforced the soldiers' cohesion and resolve. Bastogne was no longer simply a town. It was a symbol of human determination, tactical brilliance, and the ability to convert adversity into advantage. The 101st had learned to bend nature and circumstance to their will, creating a narrative of resilience that would echo through history. As Patton's armor finally appeared on the horizon, breaking through snow and enemy lines, the 101st stood ready, their resolve undiminished by the harshest winter in memory. Their refusal to be rescued until absolutely necessary was not stubbornness. It was strategy, courage, and proof that even in frozen hell, human ingenuity and spirit could prevail. Bastogne had become a crucible of endurance, and the 101st emerged not merely as survivors, but as legends forged in ice, fire, and unbreakable will. The final minutes of the siege would be remembered forever, a testament to the extraordinary capability of men who refused to yield to both enemy and environment alike. The siege of Bastogne had reached a fever pitch. Snow swirled in blinding gusts, artillery shells tore through frozen buildings, and every street, bridge, and alley became a battleground. Despite being surrounded by superior German forces, the 101st Airborne Division refused to yield an inch, demonstrating a combination of courage, discipline, and tactical brilliance that defied the very logic of warfare. Each paratrooper moved with precision, each squad executing orders that balanced survival and offense, improvisation and discipline. The town itself had transformed into a fortress of ingenuity, barricades made of wrecked vehicles, felled trees and debris-blocked streets, while every building became a stronghold, every rooftop an observation post. The Germans believed they could crush the defenders with sheer force. But the paratroopers' defiance made every attack costly and every advance perilous. Commanders of the 101st understood the psychological dimension of warfare. Their refusal to be rescued by Patton was not arrogance. It was a calculated display of resolve. By holding Bastogne alone, they sent a message to both the enemy and Allied command. They were capable, disciplined, and unshakable. This defiance amplified morale within the town while sowing hesitation among German officers. Every defensive action, from repelling a tank to a sniper picking off a lone infantryman, reinforced the image of invincibility. Soldiers were acutely aware of the stakes. A single breach could unravel the entire line, yet each man remained steadfast, motivated by shared purpose, camaraderie, and a belief that they could withstand anything. The harsh winter compounded the intensity of combat. Soldiers battled frostbite and hypothermia even as they fired rifles, manned machine guns, and reinforced barricades. Nightfall brought even greater peril. Darkness, swirling snow, and muffled movement created a labyrinth of danger. Scouts and runners braved these conditions to deliver messages, report enemy movements, and ensure coordination among defensive positions. Improvisation became an art form. Every soldier knew that conventional tactics would not suffice. Survival required innovation, quick thinking, and the ability to exploit every advantage the environment provided. The frozen streets and rubble-strewn alleys became both shield and trap, offering protection while creating hazards that only the most alert and disciplined could navigate. As German forces intensified their assaults, the 101st's coordinated defense became more than a tactical strategy. It became a psychological weapon. Enemy troops, expecting an easy victory against an isolated unit, were met with relentless fire, ambushes, and unexpected counterattacks. Mortar and artillery teams struck with deadly precision. Snipers eliminated key targets, and infantry squads executed well-timed flanking maneuvers. Each German advance was repelled, often at disproportionate cost. The defenders' ingenuity and discipline transformed Bastogne from a trapped town into a bastion of resistance, demonstrating that a small, determined force could hold against overwhelming numbers. Medical and logistical challenges threatened to weaken the paratroopers, yet they adapted continuously. Wounded soldiers were treated under fire, snow was melted for drinking water, and supplies were rationed meticulously. Even as frostbite and exhaustion took their toll, the men found ways to sustain their operations. Fires were used not only for warmth, but also to create light and conceal movement, and improvised signals maintained coordination across the town. Each adaptation reinforced their resilience, turning limitations into tools of survival. The combination of tactical mastery, environmental adaptation, and sheer determination created a force that, while outnumbered and outgunned, could not be easily defeated. Communication, discipline, and trust were the backbone of Bastogne's defense. Officers and NCOs coordinated squads with precision, anticipating enemy movements and responding with calculated force. Soldiers trusted one another implicitly, knowing that the failure of a single individual could endanger the entire line. Yet this trust also fostered extraordinary heroism. Men volunteered for dangerous patrols, ran ammunition through exposed streets, and manned critical positions with unwavering resolve. The cohesion of the 101st was a force multiplier, enabling them to maximize limited resources, withstand repeated assaults, and maintain operational effectiveness despite extreme conditions. By the final hours before Patton's arrival, Bastogne had become a symbol of unbreakable resolve. German commanders, frustrated and unable to breach the lines, recognized the futility of their repeated attacks. The paratroopers' decision to refuse immediate rescue had paid off. The town held, the enemy was delayed, and Allied forces gained a critical advantage in the Ardennes offensive. Soldiers, exhausted yet unbroken, maintained vigilance, ready to fight another day if necessary. The siege had not only tested physical endurance and tactical skill, but also demonstrated the power of morale, ingenuity, and collective courage. As the first tanks of Patton's Third Army thundered into Bastogne, breaking through snow and German positions alike, the 101st Airborne stood ready yet unbowed. Their defiance had reshaped the battlefield, buying crucial time and securing victory through their own resolve. The decision to hold alone had not been reckless. It had been a deliberate, calculated act of heroism. Bastogne would forever stand as a testament to what disciplined, determined, and courageous men could achieve when they refused to surrender, defied overwhelming odds, and trusted in their own skill, strategy, and indomitable spirit. Amid the roar of artillery and the bitter bite of winter, individual stories of heroism and sacrifice emerged from the snow-laden streets of Bastogne, illustrating the unyielding spirit of the 101st Airborne Division. Each soldier, though one among thousands, became a linchpin in the defense, performing acts of courage that would be remembered long after the siege ended. Riflemen held their positions for hours on end, manning machine guns in freezing temperatures, fingers stiffened by frost, yet still capable of pulling triggers with deadly accuracy. Medics ran across snow-covered streets under artillery fire to tend to wounded comrades, improvising bandages from scraps and stabilizing men whose lives hung by a thread. Even the simplest acts, sharing a meager ration, lending a blanket, or reinforcing a barricade, became heroic in the context of survival against overwhelming odds. The 101st's ingenuity shone brightest under pressure. Soldiers converted barns into fortresses, sniper positions into command posts, and ordinary debris into defensive assets. Every man understood that their ingenuity could tip the balance, turn the tide of a firefight, or save lives. Communication was critical. Runners and scouts navigated icy streets and shell-shattered terrain to relay information, coordinate artillery strikes, and ensure that defensive lines remained intact. Each step taken across the frozen battlefield was a calculated risk. Yet every soldier acted with a sense of purpose. guided by both duty and the unspoken code of camaraderie that bound them together. One of the most remarkable aspects of the siege was the psychological resilience of the soldiers. Isolation, fatigue, and fear were constant companions, yet the 101st found ways to maintain morale. Songs were sung around improvised fires, letters were written to loved ones under candlelight, and shared stories of past battles or small triumphs became fuel for endurance. Officers led by example, exposing themselves to the same dangers as their men, reinforcing the belief that leadership was not a position of safety, but a shared responsibility in the crucible of war. Soldiers who might have faltered under normal circumstances became pillars of strength, sustained by mutual trust and an unwavering belief in the collective mission. The siege tested the limits of human endurance. Frostbite, hunger, and exhaustion were constant threats, yet the soldiers adapted continuously. Improvised stoves provided warmth, snow was melted for water, and ammunition was rationed meticulously. Even with limited medical supplies, the medics and fellow soldiers ensured that wounded men were treated promptly, sometimes under direct fire. Every day of resistance was a testament to ingenuity and resilience, a demonstration that even in the harshest conditions, discipline and courage could overcome material limitations. The soldiers' ability to endure and innovate under fire became as decisive as the tactical maneuvers executed across Bastogne. Enemy attacks became increasingly desperate as the siege wore on. German forces attempted infiltration, targeted artillery bombardments, and flanking maneuvers, hoping to exploit perceived weaknesses in the defenses. Yet each attempt was met with calculated countermeasures. Mortars were repositioned to strike advancing columns, sniper teams eliminated key targets, and infantry squads executed coordinated maneuvers that disrupted enemy formations. The 101st's refusal to rely solely on reinforcements forced the Germans into repeated failed assaults, inflicting heavy casualties and creating a psychological toll that matched the physical strain. Every defensive action reinforced the mythos of the paratroopers' invincibility, a reputation that would echo far beyond Bastogne. Stories of extraordinary bravery abounded. Soldiers manned exposed positions for hours, protecting vital supply routes. Officers ventured into enemy fire to coordinate counterattacks, and entire squads improvised defenses on the fly when buildings collapsed or fortifications were destroyed. Even the most ordinary soldiers performed acts that, in another context, would be considered heroic beyond measure. The siege of Bastogne transformed every action into a pivotal moment, every decision into a life-or-death choice, and every soldier into a participant in history. The collective courage of these men created a force multiplier, enabling them to hold against overwhelming odds and maintain the integrity of the defensive perimeter. By the time Patton's Third Army arrived to relieve Bastogne, the human spirit had proven as crucial as any weapon. The 101st's refusal to be immediately rescued was not stubbornness, but a testament to their capability, courage, and understanding of the strategic importance of their stand. Each paratrooper had contributed to a defense that combined physical endurance, tactical genius, and psychological resilience into a unified, almost superhuman effort. Their actions delayed the German advance, inflicted heavy losses, and ensured that Bastogne would become an enduring symbol of defiance. The town itself stood as a monument to human courage, ingenuity, and the extraordinary lengths to which men will go to protect one another and fulfill their mission. As snow continued to fall and artillery fire diminished with the arrival of reinforcements, soldiers took stock of what they had endured. Exhausted, battered, and frostbitten, they knew they had survived something far beyond ordinary warfare. Bastogne had become a crucible that had forged ordinary men into legends. Their courage and resilience immortalized in every frozen street, every barricade, and every story of survival under fire. The siege demonstrated that the human spirit, when combined with ingenuity, discipline, and unwavering resolve, could overcome even the most harrowing circumstances and transform the course of history. As the first light of dawn broke over the snow-covered streets of Bastogne, a profound silence settled over the town, broken only by the distant rumble of Patton's advancing tanks and the low murmur of exhausted, triumphant soldiers. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded, outnumbered, and battered by weeks of relentless combat and brutal winter, had achieved the impossible. They had held Bastogne against one of the most formidable German offensives of the Second World War. Every frozen foxhole, every barricaded street, every improvised defensive position testified to human courage, ingenuity, and the unbreakable spirit of men who refused to surrender. Their decision to refuse immediate rescue by Patton's forces was not recklessness, but a calculated act of audacity, demonstrating faith in their own resilience and tactical mastery. History would remember Bastogne not merely as a town, but as a crucible of endurance, bravery, and defiance. The siege had transformed ordinary soldiers into legends. Each man had endured frostbite, hunger, and constant bombardment. Each had improvised solutions to impossible problems, from melting snow for water to creating makeshift defenses under enemy fire. Officers and enlisted men alike demonstrated leadership under extreme conditions, coordinating counterattacks, maintaining morale, and reinforcing lines with nothing more than raw courage and tactical ingenuity. Even in isolation, every soldier understood the critical importance of his role, and together they created a cohesive, almost superhuman force capable of repelling attacks far superior in number and firepower. Bastogne had become a testament to the extraordinary capacity of disciplined, courageous men operating under pressure, forging a legacy that would inspire generations of soldiers to come. The psychological impact of the 101st's defiance extended far beyond the town itself. German commanders, frustrated and demoralized by repeated failed assaults, were forced to reconsider their strategy, delaying their advance and inflicting losses that could not be easily replaced. Allied forces, witnessing the resilience and ingenuity of the paratroopers, gained renewed confidence in the effectiveness of highly trained, cohesive units capable of independent action. Bastogne became a symbol of courage under pressure, of the power of will, ingenuity, and tactical acumen to overcome even the harshest environmental and combat conditions. Letters, memoirs, and oral histories would preserve the stories of heroism and endurance, immortalizing the 101st's stand for eternity. As Patton's armored columns thundered into Bastogne, breaking through the last of the enemy's encirclement, the paratroopers did not merely step aside. They had already secured the town through their unyielding defense. Their refusal to be rescued until absolutely necessary amplified the strategic and psychological victory, showcasing the profound interplay between human determination and military acumen. Soldiers exhausted yet unbroken could finally rest, knowing they had shaped history with their courage and ingenuity. Bastogne was no longer just a town under siege. It was a monument to defiance, a symbol of what disciplined, courageous, and creative minds could achieve when faced with overwhelming odds. In the quiet aftermath, as snow continued to fall and the remnants of battle littered the streets, the legacy of Bastogne was clear. Victory was not simply a product of numbers or firepower, but of human will, collective determination, and the courage to stand firm when retreat might have seemed wiser. The 101st Airborne Division had not only survived, they had reshaped the battlefield, delayed a major offensive, and demonstrated that the unbreakable human spirit could prevail even in the harshest conditions. Bastogne became a defining moment of the Second World War, a story of endurance, ingenuity, and audacious courage that would echo through history, inspiring generations and proving that the greatest victories often come not from overwhelming force, but from the indomitable will to hold the line against all odds.